Hey, John.
Hi, Harold. How are you?
For a minute there, I thought I could have sworn that Fred said this week he'll be in, next week he'll be out. I was getting kind of worried. It was already 26 after here.
I know. I guess we'll find out why in a few minutes. So, how are you
Yeah,
doing?
I'm trying to keep afloat.
Didn't you say you're going out to the California desert here in the next week or so?
No, now last past weekend I went up to Lake Fontana. So, which is
That's in the desert, isn't it?
no, it's up in it's west of Asheville and it crosses over the Tennessee North Carolina line.
Oh, is that one of those
It's a TVA lake.
TVA? Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Those are sure pretty lakes that they built, all those TVA lakes.
It's it's very nice, very steep. They drain
Yes.
it. It goes anywhere from 100 feet to 400 feet deep. The dam is the tallest east of the Mississippi, and they drop it by like 57 feet in the wintertime.
Wow.
Yeah, in fact, very unusual. So it's bordered on the north by the Smoky Mountains and on the south by the National Forest. There's really no homes on the property per se, but people have floated float houses on the lake. They were
Houseboats.
assigned permits. And so when the lake draws down, because they're all tied to trees, so to speak, when the lake is being drawn down, they have to pull all of those floating homes to some location. And that's when they do their winter work and remodel. And then when the lake floods back up, they float them back to wherever.
So
Yeah,
they're
they did.
literally houseboats on the lakes?
Yeah, they're
Yeah,
like the size
it's
of a single wide.
some of them are smaller. Some of them are no bigger than a camper trailer. But now they typically have a couple of docks, floating independent docks bolted to them, so they look wider.
Yeah, they're
Wow.
like they're not issuing any more permits for those, from what I understand,
Nope.
and they'll be canceling permits,
Yeah.
so
So
they'll go away soon.
if you have a permit and your house needs to be redone, you can't build anything bigger than what you previously had. Somebody where Mary Beth's family, they have a cottage on land, but have a dock at the marina. Um, the owner of that just sold 5 permits that they had been holding on to. So
Yeah,
kind of interesting because
Yeah.
the only
yeah,
way to get to your house is by having a boat from one of the marinas, and you either have to have solar power or diesel or generator power. And if you want to go to the bathroom, you got to have a permit and a permitted septic system, which you pay for one of the few licensed lake people to come around and pump out your
Oh, I was
and
going
sewage
to
that
tank.
say so
and that's been the
it's
issue with
actually
them.
yeah, it's actually like a shipboard system. You your
Or a
sewage goes
camper.
into tanks and then somebody comes by every few days and pumps them.
Well, hopefully not every few days, but yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Fred.
Hey, Chris
Hey, John.
and Fred.
Hey,
How
John.
are you, sir?
Good. Yeah. Sue emailed me. She won't be here this week. She had something
Oh,
else she had to be
Oh,
at.
did she?
So yeah,
and
That's too
you're
bad.
going to be gone next week.
I'll be gone next Tuesday. Yeah, we'll
Okay.
get the Tuesday. Um, but for this Tuesday, we're on chapter 7, of Deuteronomy. And
Right.
this again, this is a long, long speech by Moses, wrapping everything up, before his death and before they go on to cross the Jordan. Um, the first part really is just the first few verses, verses 12 through 15 on chapter 7, where the parsha starts. And this basically is just a reward for keeping God's rules. Somebody want to read verses 12 through 15?
And
I
because you
will.
listen to these rules and keep them and do them,
Oh,
the
John's
Lord
done
your
it.
God will keep with you the covenant and the steadfast love that he swore to your fathers. He will love you, bless you, and multiply you. He will also bless the fruit of your womb and the fruit of your ground, your grain and your wine and your oil, and increase of your herds and the young of your flock in the land that he swore to your fathers to give you. You shall be blessed above all peoples. There shall not be male or female barren among you or among your livestock. And the Lord will take away from you all sickness and none of the evil diseases of Egypt, none of the evil diseases of Egypt, which you knew will he inflict on you, but he will lay them all on all who hate you.
So basically, what he's saying is, if you follow, my laws, you're going to thrive in this land. And notice also that fertility is kind of job one here. That's mentioned over
Yeah,
and over again in the Bible. Um, the other thing, which of course is that there's no mention of any reward other than in this life. There's no heaven or hell. There's nothing about anything beyond this life. The rewards are all immediate, in this life. The other thing, which is interesting, it doesn't come out in the English translation, um, because in English we don't really have any way of differentiating you singular from you plural. So if you and but in Hebrew you do. There are suffix endings on nouns which are different for you singular and you plural. So it's very easy to tell the difference. And one of the really, to me, fascinating things about the biblical text, it flips back and forth between the two. One sentence is you singular, the next sentence is you plural. You singular for a couple of sentences, then you plural again. And it's almost as if they don't really differentiate between the individual and the group,
yeah,
as if there's almost no difference. And basically what they're talking about here is really a group thing. The covenant is really with Israel as a people. It's not with individual Israelites. So Israel will rise or fall as a people. And this question comes up later in the Bible, the time of the prophets. And Jeremiah and Isaiah are carrying on about, Jerusalem will be destroyed and you're going to go into exile. And when I do this in the classes at Ollie, there's always people that ask, well, what about the good guys? And why does everybody have to be punished? I mean, obviously, there are righteous people, in Jerusalem. Why can't the righteous ones be saved and the bad ones get what they deserve? But the Bible just doesn't work that way. It really is the punishments and the good things are all for the society, and every individual can take part in it. But there's really very little in here about individual salvation. Doesn't appear to be a concept they had. And again, the Hebrew text, the way they don't distinguish between singular you and plural you, really underwrites that whole thing.
but
Then
one
we
of the I was going to
go
say
ahead.
one of the things that in here that I is different from the versing and expanding upon some of the commandments was about the diseases from Egypt.
Mhm.
None of the sickness and evil from Egypt is going to follow you. That's it.
Yeah, and we don't really know whether by diseases they really mean the 10 plagues, back from the
Yeah.
Exodus, or whether they're talking about other diseases. There's all kind of rabbinic speculation about that, what they mean by this. Um, but basically, the message is, you'll thrive as a people in this land if you follow my laws. And then he
So,
shifts. Yeah, go ahead.
so back in the beginning, you said, this is all in the present tense and we didn't have a heaven or a hell and an afterlife. And we've previously discussed, I think it was us, or maybe it was with Rabbi Cohn's class, that really didn't come about till when the Roman Catholic religion was starting up to have sort
Yeah.
of the disparity between the two religions. Were there religions at the time of what we think, or what we think is at this time, that did have a heaven or hell
Oh, yeah.
or an afterlife?
Yeah, the afterlife was very common in most ancient cultures. I mean, that's why you have pyramids in Egypt.
Yeah, I was
The
going to say,
idea was,
Right.
that you
yeah,
buried this guy, you buried his servants with him, and you
yeah.
buried all his money because he's taking it with him. He's going to the next life, and he needs all this stuff. So, at least among the aristocracy in Egypt, it was common. Um, and you don't really see anything about an afterlife in Jewish writing until you get to around the second century BCE. This is actually before Christianity, but you start seeing some rabbinic writings that start mentioning what they call the world to come. Um, and there's a lot of speculation. One is that after they returned from the Babylonian exile, for about 2 centuries, they were a province of the Persian Empire until the Greeks moved into the Middle East. And the primary religion of Persia at that time was Zoroastrianism, which has a very well-defined doctrine of judgment after death and reward and
Oh,
punishment.
really?
So part of it may have been the influence of Persian culture. Also, once the Greeks moved in, you have teachings of people like Plato, who talks about the immortality of the soul. The body may die, but the soul belongs to a higher world of ideas. And so part of this, I think, was Judaism. Judaism has always interacted with the cultures, that it's been in. I think a lot of the afterlife really came into Judaism as a result of other cultures, really, the influence on them. But you,
So,
you certainly don't see it in biblical Judaism, though.
so this all the Greek uh, ideas of afterlife and soul
Hmm.
occurred how far before the Common Era?
Well, Plato is about the third century BCE. And
Hmm.
of course, in Greek mythology, you have Hades, where the souls
Yeah.
of the dead go. So there was a concept of an afterlife there.
There
Um,
was, you're
yeah,
saying,
and
yeah.
by the time Christianity began, there was a well-established Jewish concept of an afterlife, and I think that probably was an influence on Christianity.
Yeah.
So it's not
Well,
something Jews got from Christians. It was already something that the rabbis were talking about even before Christianity.
because
Well, I just was reading a little bit on the AI on that, and they say it's the oldest religion, the oldest um, religion that believed in one God, and they didn't. Um, they believe that this Aurora Mazda is beyond human comprehension, is not to be represented by idols or images. Sounds
Yeah,
very familiar.
the Zoroastrians had a fairly sophisticated religion. One thing I've always wondered about is how a Japanese car company ever got the name of a Persian god. Ahura Mazda. Oh, really? That's where they got it from. Ahura Mazda was the supreme god of Zoroastrianism. I really wonder who the Japanese marketing guy was, who came up with that.
That's great. Well, yeah, that one snuck in there, Fred.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Well, no, again,
I
Go
was
ahead.
going to say what I've seen about Egyptians going
Mhm.
way back when in the Egyptian museum is that the idea of an afterlife has always been a dominant part of their religion,
Yeah, it
or
really is a
whatever you
death.
want to call it.
Yeah,
Maybe it
yeah,
wasn't a religion, but it was definitely the human gods and the afterlife.
yeah. It's a very death-focused religion. I mean, a lot of religions, will have fancy mausoleums for the dead and, and headstones and whatnot. But the pyramids are kind of over the top. I mean, those are the biggest funeral,
Hmm.
monuments that anybody has ever built.
So are there people still practicing this?
Yeah, in Iran today, there's still Zoroastrians. There are thousands of them. They're persecuted by the Muslims. That they are a persecuted minority, but the Zoroastrian religion is still alive in Iran.
Hmm.
I'm so naive. Never heard of them in all my years of growing up.
Well, see, you and I suffer from being engineers. We didn't have all of the
It's
benefits.
a curse. I
It's a
know.
curse.
Didn't take ancient religion in engineering school. Okay, okay. Moving on. Uh, Starting with verse 16, then you get this commandment about how they're supposed to treat the people who they're going to conquer when they move into Canaan. And those are verses 16 through 26. If somebody wants to read that, 16 through 26.
Sure. You shall destroy all the peoples that your God delivers to you, showing them no pity, and you shall not worship their gods, for that would be a snare to you. Should you say to yourselves, these nations are more numerous than we, how can we dispossess them? You need have no fear of them. You have but to bear in mind that your God did to Pharaoh and all the Egyptians. The wondrous, hold on. The wondrous acts that you saw with your own eyes, the signs and the portents, the mighty hand and the outstretched arm by which your God liberated you, thus your God do to all the peoples you now fear. Your God will also send a plague against them until those who are left in hiding perish before you. Do not stand in dread of them, for the Lord your God is in your midst, a great and awesome God. One more.
Yeah, go ahead. Go through verse 26.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Uh,
go ahead. Keep going.
your God will dislodge those peoples before you little by little. You will not be able to put an end to them at once, else the wild beasts would multiply it to your hunt or to your hurt. Your God will deliver them up to you, throwing them into utter panic until they are wiped out. God will deliver their kings into your hand, and you shall obliterate their name from under the heavens. No one shall stand up to you until you have wiped them out. You shall consign the images of their gods to the fire. You shall not covet the silver and gold on them and keep it for yourselves, lest you be ensnared thereby, for that is abhorrent to your God. You must not bring an abhorrent thing into your house, or you will be proscribed like it. You must reject it as abominable and abhorrent, for it is proscribed.
So basically, what you're really reading here, in modern terms, we would call genocide and ethnic cleansing. Where he's saying to kill them all, drive
Mhm.
them out. You're God's chosen people. They're a bunch of worthless heathens. Wipe them out. Um, but actually, as a lot of historians point out, this never actually happened. If you read the book of Joshua, it looks like it's going to happen because, Joshua starts off, starting with Jericho, one victory after another. He's taking one Canaanite city after another, wiping out the population. But then you turn to the book of Judges, and obviously it never happened. There's still all these other people still living in the middle of them. The judges are always fighting Midianites or somebody else, who is still menacing them. That goes all the way through the book of Samuel. The people, beg Samuel for a king because, there's no security in the land. So, and it really is not till the time of David and Solomon that you really have a united, Israelite nation, and the other people are finally subdued. But even then, they're not wiped out. Because for centuries after that, the prophets are still complaining about all the pagan cults the people are taking up, in addition to temple worship. So Even this sounds kind of horrible, to a modern sensibility, but it never really happened. And the Bible itself really witnesses that it never actually happened. Um, the other odd thing, in verse 22, it says, "The Lord thy God will cast out those nations before thee, little by little. You may not consume them quickly, lest the beasts of the field increase upon thee." Which really sounds like that was written later on, to try to explain why they didn't conquer the land right away. It's a pretty lame excuse. They're saying, if you wipe all these people out, you'll have a hard time controlling the wild animals. But, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And a lot of scholars believe this was put in much later, after they had failed, to drive all these other people out. It's kind of, well, it's going to have to go really slowly. That was sort of put in there afterward. The other interesting verse is 25, when they
Yes.
say, when you destroy their idols, you can't take any of the silver or gold home with you. The idea this is a holy war, nobody's going to be allowed to profit from it. You see that again and again in the book of Joshua too. They'll totally wipe out this city, and there's a whole pile of loot, and yet nobody's allowed to take it. It has to be reserved for the sanctuary. And then with chapter 8, he goes back and reviews some of the history. He goes back now to the 40-year period in the desert, and this starts off with verses 1 through 6 in chapter 8. Someone wants to read that.
I'll do it. You shall faithfully observe all of the instruction that I enjoin upon you today, that you may thrive and increase and be able to possess the land that God promised on oath to your fathers. Remember the long way that your God has made you travel in the wilderness these past 40 years, in order to test you by hardships, to learn what was in your hearts, whether you would keep the divine commandments or not. God subjected you to the hardship of hunger and then gave you manna to eat, which neither you nor your ancestors had ever known, in order to teach you that a human being does not live on bread alone, but that one may live on anything that God decrees. The clothes upon you did not wear out. Well, that would be nice. Nor did your feet swell these 40 years. Bear in mind that your God disciplines you just as a householder disciplines his son. Therefore, keep the commandment of your God, walk in God's way, and show reverence.
Yeah. So basically, and this really is not quite true. What he's saying is 40 years in the desert was kind of a trial to prove you. But we know from the previous text that, there's only supposed to be 2 years. The other 30 years were a punishment that were tacked on after the spies that he sends out, to spy out the land, come back and say, we can't do this. Let's go back to Egypt. So that's not quite really true. There's 2 years in the Sinai probably would have been enough of a trial. The other interesting thing about this text is where he says that he afflicted you and suffered you to hunger and then gave you manna. And of course, you have a very famous line here, the man does not live by bread alone, but by everything that comes from the mouth of God. It's a good illustration, really, how things change over time. Because if you read the text here, it really sounds like saying you don't live by bread alone, but by whatever God supplies for you to eat. You didn't have bread in the Sinai, but he created manna for you. But the modern understanding is really different. You often hear people quote that man does not live by bread alone. But what they really mean is the material things are not enough. You have to have spiritual values also. So the meaning of a text has really changed over time from the original meaning here. Um, and then with 7, he goes back again into what's going to happen when you get into the land. And this is 7 through 19. Somebody wants to read 7 through 19.
For your God is bringing you into a good land, a land with streams and springs and fountains issuing from plain and hill, a land of wheat and barley, of vines, figs and pomegranates, a land of olive trees and honey, a land where you may eat food without stint, where you will lack nothing, a land whose rocks are iron and from whose hills you can mine copper. When you have eaten your fill, give thanks to your God for the good land given to you. Take care lest you forget your God and fail to keep the divine commandments, rules, and laws which I enjoin upon you today. When you have eaten your fill, and have built fine houses to live in, and your herds and flocks have multiplied, and your silver and gold have increased, and everything you own has prospered, beware lest your heart grow haughty, and you forget your God, who freed you from the land of Egypt, the house of bondage, who led you through the great and terrible wilderness, with its serpents, and scorpions, a parched land with no water in it, who brought forth water for you from the flinty rock, who fed you in the wilderness with manna, which your ancestors had never known, in order to test you by hardships, only to benefit you in the end. And you say to yourselves, my own power and the might of my own hand have won this wealth for me. Remember that it is your God who gives you the power to get wealth in fulfillment of the covenant made on oath with your fathers, as is still the case. If you do
So,
forget your
no, go ahead.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay. If you do forget your God and follow other gods to serve them or bow down to them, I warn you this day that you shall certainly perish, like the nations that God will cause to perish before you. So shall you perish because you did not heed your God.
And again, one of the things you notice about this is you read through Deuteronomy. The downside of Deuteronomy is it's very repetitious. And it's really going to be the same stuff over and over and over again, and said in different ways. But again, this is sort of Moses' last chance to talk to his people. And in a sense, I think there's something kind of pathetic underlying it, because I think he knows deep down that they're not really going to follow his instructions. He already knows when they get in there, they're going to take up the customs of the people around them, and so he's over and over again, he's hammering home the same message. But I think underneath it all, he really sort of knows what their future is really going to be. There are a
So
couple of interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
in the very beginning, it says, when you have eaten your fill, give thanks to your God. But we
Mhm.
usually say the blessing before we eat, not after.
Actually, I'm glad you brought that up. That's just what I was going to say. Actually,
Oh,
this is no, actually, we don't do it. We used to do it, and Rabbi Wilson, was a rabbi at Beth Israel. And then I think we did it a few times when uh, I think when Rabbi Marco was here, we kind of dropped it out of use. But you do say what they call the Birkat Hamazon, the blessings after the meal. We haven't done it in several years now, but that really is customary. Even though you do a motzi before the meal, you still do the Birkat Hamazon after the meal, which again, maybe we ought to start doing again. We haven't done it in several years, but this verse actually is what the rabbis used as the text to base that on. That after you've eaten and you've enjoyed the meal, then you give thanks. There's also one other interesting verse here, verse 16, where it says, who fed you in the wilderness with manna, which your fathers knew not, that he might afflict thee and that he might prove thee and to do thee good at the latter end. The rabbis of the Talmud really picked up on this verse, and there's a concept called the afflictions of love. When God afflicts the Jewish people with various kinds of troubles, it's because he loves them. The same reason the father chastises the son, he does it out of love, because he knows it for his child's good in the long run. And therefore, when all the bad things that have happened to Israel over its history, these are what they call the afflictions of love. This was God chastising a people he loves. The only problem is after the Holocaust, it got really harder to hang on to that idea. And there are a lot of Jewish theologians after the Holocaust who said that doesn't work anymore. You can't fit the Holocaust into that.
Now, one of the things that's interesting as we go through this is that it really paints God in a paternal role,
Yeah,
like
it
you
does.
would whether it's a little fowl with their flock, or animals with their herds, or like us
Mhm.
people with our our flock. He's really taken this paternal role and shaping the parameters by which we'll be successful.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the primary image all through this whole thing,
Yeah,
really.
yeah,
Um, although actually, later on, the Middle Ages, probably the most rationalistic of all the Jewish philosophers was Moses Maimonides in the 13th century. And his idea was the reason that we refer to God as a father, or sometimes as a king, that's the other thing that you frequently see in the Bible, is that we can't really imagine what God is. That he's beyond any human experience and beyond human imagination. So all we can do for language to talk about him is just use the only authority symbols that we're used to here, which are basically fathers and kings. Those are the
yeah, yeah,
basic authority figures, in our society. So we refer to him as our father, our king, uh, because we have no other language for him. We really can't describe God any other way other than what we have from our own experience. Um, and then he goes on. We're now in chapter 9, and he goes on uh, to how God will guide them in their wars when they get into Canaan. And this is verses 1 through 7 of chapter 9. Someone wants to read that.
and hear, O Israel, you are to cross over the Jordan today to go in to dispossess nations greater and mightier than you, cities great and fortified up to heaven, a people great and tall, the sons of Anakim, whom you know and of whom you have heard it said, who can stand before the sons of Anak? Know therefore today that he who goes before you as a consuming fire is the Lord your God. He will destroy them and subdue them before you. So you shall drive them out and make them perish quickly, as the Lord has promised you. Do not say in your heart, after the Lord your God has thrust them out before you, it is because of my righteousness that the Lord has brought me in to possess this land, whereas it is because of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is driving them out, not because of your righteousness or the uprightness of your heart are you going to possess their land, but because of the wickedness of these nations, the Lord your God is driving them out from before you, and that he may confirm the word that the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Know, therefore, that the Lord your God is not giving you this good land to possess because of your righteousness, for you are a stubborn people. Uh, Remember and do not forget how you provoked the Lord your God to wrath in the wilderness.
Okay, I'll stop there. Yeah, this which is kind of interesting. A lot of stuff is in those few verses. Number one, the interesting thing is whenever there's a battle, one of the things the Bible never talks about is about military strategy or about the great warriors of Israel and whatnot. It's always God. The
Yeah,
battle is going to be won or lost by God, not because of great warriors or superior courage or skill by the Israelites. If you compare this to a Greek classic, an ancient Greek classic like the Iliad, which is celebrating guys like Achilles and Hector, these great warriors, and the war is really a chance for them to show off what they can do. The whole Trojan War thing is just a way for heroes on each side to get glory. And you don't really see any of that, almost none of it in the Bible. The war goes the way God wants it to go. Probably the only time they celebrate anybody's individual courage or power is when David kills Goliath.
yeah,
Maybe that's one of the few exceptions. But otherwise, they're just not into this military stuff. The other thing which is striking here is when he says, you're not being given this land because you're such great people. You're in there because these people are worse than you are. Which brings up the question.
that is in itself is just kind of amazing.
It is. And it raises the question, why were these people chosen?
Yeah.
Why did God choose them in the
Why-
first place?
Yeah.
And of course, one answer is that they always go back to, and they mention it here, the Lord swore unto thy fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And one theory is, that God chose Abraham. He was the guy he chose, and then promised all this to his descendants. And maybe his descendants didn't turn out so well, but God's gonna still keep the promise he made to
Yeah.
Abraham, though.
Yeah.
And you actually see this over and over through the 5 books of Moses. Israel, is sinning again, and God just about had it with them. But then he says, I remember the covenant that I made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so, this really is about the only reason the Bible gives for why Israel was chosen. There really is no other reason given. Okay. And then the last part in verse 6, where he says, uh, know therefore it was not for thy righteousness that the Lord thy God giveth thee this good land to possess it, but thou art a stiff-necked people. And that stiff-necked people, that's an image that it's going to occur over and over again. The prophets use it a lot. And it's basically an agricultural metaphor. If you have a team of oxen or horses or mules that won't bend their heads so you can put a yoke on them, they keep flipping their heads back and you can't keep a
Oh.
yoke on them. You can't do anything useful with them. This is where the stiff-necked metaphor comes from.
Huh.
And then he's reviewing their history, and starting with verse 8, he brings up the whole golden calf thing again. And this is verses 8 through. It's a long actual narrative here. And it's also a little bit different version than you get in the book of Exodus. One of the things with Deuteronomy, they review a lot of the previous history, but it's often a slightly different version of it. We saw with the Ten Commandments, the Sabbath commandment in Deuteronomy is not exactly the same as the Sabbath commandment was in Exodus. And here they're going to retell the story of the golden calf, and it's not quite the same as it was in Exodus. Somebody wants to read 8 through 24.
If y'all can put up with me. At Horeb, you provoked God, that God was angry enough with you to have destroyed you. I had ascended the mountain to receive the tablets of stone, the tablets of the covenant that God had made with you. And I strayed on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights, eating no bread and drinking no water. And God gave me the 2 tablets of stone, inscribed by the finger of God, with the exact words that God had addressed to you on the mountain out of the fire on the day of the assembly. At the end of those 40 days and 40 nights, God gave me the 2 tablets of stone, the tablets of the covenant. And God said to me, hurry, go down from here at once, for the people whom brought you out of Egypt have acted wickedly. They have been quick to stray from the path that I enjoined upon them. They have made themselves a molten image. God further said to me, I see that this is a stiff-necked people. Let me alone, and I will destroy them and blot out their name from under heaven. And I will make you a nation far more numerous than they. I started down the mountain, a mountain ablaze with fire, the 2 tablets of the covenant in my 2 hands. I saw how you sinned against God. You had made yourselves a molten calf. You had been quick to stray from the path that God had enjoined upon you. Thereupon I gripped the 2 tablets and flung them away with both my hands, smashing them before your eyes. I threw myself down before God, eating no bread and drinking no water, 40 days and 40 nights as before, because of the great wrong you had committed, doing what displeased and vexed God. But I was in dread of the fierce anger against you, which moved God to wipe you out. And that time too, God gave heed to me. Moreover, God was angry enough with Aaron to have destroyed him. So I interceded for Aaron at that time. As for that sinful thing that you had made, the calf, I took it and put it to the fire. I broke it to bits and ground it thoroughly until it was fine as dust. And I threw its dust into the brook that comes down from the mountain. Again, you provoked God at Taberah and at Massa and at Kibroth Haftava. And when God sent you down from Kadesh Barnea, saying, Go up and take possession of the land that I'm giving you, you flouted the command of your God, whom you did not put your trust in nor obey. As long as I have known you, you have been defiant toward God. When I lay prostrate before you, oh, sorry, my computer did a weird thing.
You got
When I
to
lay,
24.
yeah, when I
Yeah,
lay prostrate before God those 40 days and 40 nights before God was determined to destroy you, I prayed to God and said, O Lord, do not annihilate your very
annihilate.
own people, yeah, whom you redeemed in your majesty and whom you freed from Egypt with a mighty hand. Give thought to your servants Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and pay no heed to the stubbornness of this people, its wickedness and its sinfulness. Else the country from which you freed us will say it was because God was powerless to bring them into the land promised them, and because of having rejected them, that their God brought them out to have them die in the wilderness. Yet they are your very own people, whom you freed, and your great might and your outstretched arm. Thank
Yeah,
you.
there are a number of details here that are different than the first time they tell the story in Exodus. If you look at verse 18, where he says, I fell down before the Lord, and is that the first 40 days and 40 nights? I didn't either eat bread or drink water. And he's just come back from Sinai, where he was up there for 40 days and 40 nights, not eating or drinking then. So this is tacking 40 more on. You assumed hopefully he grabbed a snack or something in between. Doing an 80-day fast. But this detail was not in the story that was in Exodus. And then if you go to verse 20, moreover, the Lord was very angry with Aaron to have destroyed him, and I prayed for Aaron, which is not mentioned at all, in the Exodus story. This is something new that the writer of Deuteronomy put in. And then again, at the very end, the two reasons he gave are the same as Exodus. One, all the Egyptians will say, well, after this whole project, he failed. They didn't go into the promised land. It's going to make you look bad in front of all the other gods. And then he brings up the other reason, you swore this to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that covenant's unbreakable, no matter how bad these people have turned out to be. The covenant you made with the patriarchs is still in force. You got to bring these people in. And then when he goes to chapter 10, he goes again. The story's a little bit different than it was told back in Exodus. So somebody wants to read verses 1 through 11 on chapter 10.
Yeah, I got it.
Mhm.
Oh, who spoke up? Was that you, Rachel? Okay. Therefore the Lord said to me, Carve out 2 tablets of stone like the first, and come up to me on the mountain, and make an ark of wood. I will inscribe on the tablets the commandments that were on the first tablets that you smashed, and you shall deposit them in the ark. I made an ark of acacia wood, and carved out 2 tablets of stone like the first. I took the 2 tablets with me and went up the mountain. After inscribing on the tablets the same text as on the first, the 10 commandments that the Lord addressed to you on the mountain out of the fire on the day of the assembly, the Lord gave them to me. Then I left and went down from the mountains, and I deposited the tablets in the ark that I had made, where they still are, as the Lord had commanded me. From that place, The Israelites marched on Masera. Aaron died there and was buried there, and his son Eleazar became priest in his stead. From there, they marched to Good God, and from there to Jotbath, region of running brooks. At that time, the Lord set apart the tribe of Levi to carry the ark of the Lord's covenant, to stand in attendance upon the Lord, and to bless in God's name, as is still the case. This is why Levi has received no hereditary portion along with its kin. The Lord is its portion, as your God the Lord spoke concerning it. I had stayed on the mountain, as I did the first time, 40 days and 40 nights, and the Lord heeded me once again. The Lord agreed not to destroy you.
So here again, the first time Moses goes up the mountain in Exodus, there's no ark. Here he's told to make an ark, which is actually contradicts Exodus a little bit because, when you get into all the details of the building of the sanctuary, God gives instruction for Bezalel and his work crews to do the ark. So here it's a little bit different. The other thing is in verse 10, he goes back up for another 40 days and nights. So this is his third round of this, 40 days and nights with the original 10 commandments. Then apparently he lays on the ground or whatever he does for 40 days and nights because of the sin of a golden calf. And now he's up there for another 40 days and nights. So it's 120 days and nights altogether on this thing. Now, there's one of the rabbis of a Talmud that points out that that's a day for every year of his life. Moses lives to 120. And so, in a sense, you might look at, rather than take this as literal, which obviously is physiologically impossible, you might take this as symbolic, these three symbolic 40-day things and making up the years of Moses' life. And again, as we've seen before, 40 is a favorite magic number in the Bible. We don't know why, but it pops up everywhere.
Fred,
Hey, Fred.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, John. Go ahead.
Chris, go ahead, Chris.
I was just going to ask. I thought in the first story that God wrote on the tablets, and here it's saying that Moses did. Did I just misremember?
Yeah, no, a rather rabbinic interpretation is that as kind of a punishment, Moses had to do some of the work this time. Yeah, you're right. Again, Deuteronomy does differ from Exodus this time. There is a difference between the two stories. But again, like we said before, if you assume that this was started off as oral tradition and was eventually written down centuries later, you figure there had to be different versions of the same story. And apparently, whoever edited this book, assuming that there were editors, weren't bothered by that. Modern editor, would straighten all this out. You wouldn't have a modern book go to press today with all these little inconsistencies in it. But apparently, it didn't bother the original editors of the Bible.
I was going to ask basically the same question. It was like the first set of tablets got destroyed, and then he sent them to do a redo for another set of tablets, of which this time Moses did the writing.
The writing, yeah. Which is not the same thing as being written by the finger of God. So these were not really, quite like the originals.
So
the other thing which modern theologians have brought up is, one of the things that you see with Moses here and really everywhere that involves Moses, he's really the intermediary between God and the Israelites. God really doesn't speak directly to the Israelites or to any other Israelites besides Moses. And one of the things, that the rabbis established as kind of a principle in Judaism, that there should be no intermediary between man and God. One of the reasons why the rabbis rejected Christianity is because they saw that Jesus as being a kind of intermediary between man and God. But yet here Moses really appears to be doing that, even though there was nobody like Moses ever again that had that kind of place in Judaism. Here it really does appear like Moses is serving as kind of an intermediary between his people and God.
now, when he has him build the ark out of acacia, okay, is the word ark mean the same thing all through time? Is it?
Well, actually, the
Or
word
does it mean a housing for the tablets?
It's really a housing. The word for ark, the first mention of an ark, in the Bible is Noah's Ark,
Yeah.
and that in Hebrew is a teva. And which really means a floating ark in a sense. The only time teva is used again is the story of Moses. When Moses is a baby and his mother puts him in this little basket and puts him on the Nile for Pharaoh's daughter to find. The same Hebrew word is used, teva. It's a little mini ark, that Moses is put in. But what's used for the Ten Commandments is called an aron. It's a different Hebrew word. So this ark is
Oh,
not like Noah's Ark or the ark that Moses was put in. And then he goes on with starting with verse 12. I'll do a little bit of the reading. You guys have done enough of the work. I'll read some of that now. Starting with verse 12 on 10. And now, Israel, what does the Lord thy God require of thee? But to fear the Lord thy God, to walk in all his ways, to love him, and to serve the Lord thy God with all thy heart and all thy soul, and to keep for thy good the commandments of the Lord and his statutes which I command you this day. Behold, if the Lord thy God belongs to heaven, the heaven of heavens, the earth, and all that is therein. Only the Lord had a delight in thy fathers to love them, and he chose their seed after them, even you, above all people, as it is this day. Again, which sort of lends weight to the argument that the people who were really chosen were the patriarchs. The people God really loved initially is Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and he bound themselves to them, with a permanent covenant. So no matter how bad their great grandchildren turned out, he's going to stick with them. They're still going to be his people, no matter what. And then verse 16 is circumcised, therefore, the foreskin of your heart, and be no more stiff-necked. It's kind of a striking image. It's as if there's a membrane around your heart that's keeping it from absorbing, God's teaching. So cut it away. Open up your heart to God's teaching. And of course, Paul picks up on this. In Paul several times in the Acts and in several of his letters, it says, "Circumcise your heart." Of course, what Paul did though is take it a step further, and he says you can do the circumcision, the metaphorical circumcision of your heart in place of the physical circumcision. So he took it a step further than most Jews at this time would go along with. What God's saying here is you still have to do the physical circumcision, but also you have to metaphorically circumcise your heart. Paul says, forget about the physical circumcision. The law doesn't hold anymore for Christians. Just circumcise your heart. And then he goes on in verse 17, for the Lord your God, he is the God of gods and Lord of lords, the great God, the mighty, the awful, who regards not persons nor taketh reward. He does execute justice for the fatherless, the widow, and loves the stranger in giving him food and raiment. And here again, you come to this triad that the Bible emphasizes over and over, the orphan, the widow, and the stranger. The society is going to be judged essentially, and the prophets use this as a basic thing. Your society is going to be judged on how you treat the orphan, the widow, and the stranger. Because when you think about it, in a traditional patriarchal tribal society, who would be the most vulnerable, marginalized people? A child who has lost his parents, a woman who has lost her husband, and a stranger who has no blood ties within the tribe. They're the people who are most vulnerable and the people the society has to take care of. In the New Testament, Jesus would call them the least of these. It's really the same kind of concept. And then he goes on, love you therefore the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. In fact, that actually is the most repeated concept, repeated commandment in the entire Torah. Between Exodus and Deuteronomy, that commandment, you shall love the stranger because you were a stranger in the land of Egypt, is actually repeated 17 times, far
wow.
more than any other commandment that God gives in the Torah.
So
And then he
the beginning of that You were, where did we start? It sounded like part of the service that we do. I can't remember the part. Where is it? No, it's up there. No. Yeah. Only to revere your God only and to love and serve your God with all your heart and soul. It sounds like something we do a lot on Friday night
It's the
services.
Shema. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And these commandments which I teach you this day, you shall teach to your children. You shall speak of them and on and on. Yeah, this is really the Shema, first paragraph of the Shema again, but again in an altered version. And that's what Deuteronomy does. It repeats a lot of Exodus, but often with a different twist or with a little different version of it. That's why it sounds familiar.
Yeah. Fred, also on verse 18, he executes justice for the fatherless and the widow and loves the sojourner, giving him food and clothing. Isn't that pretty much the same philosophy that the Eastern, whether it's in Japan or China or what have you, those Eastern religions have that as one of their core philosophies?
You know, many religions do. And again, welcoming the stranger, it's hard to think of any religion that doesn't. Islam, the Quran emphasizes that you have to treat the stranger well. Um, it's sort of a basic teaching of almost every religion.
Yeah.
Then it wraps up with chapter 11. Although I don't think we need to read all of that, but there's one interesting part of chapter 11. Let's see. Yeah, if you look at verse 18, he repeats the Shema again from Exodus. If you look at verse 18 of chapter 11, therefore you shall lay up these my words in your heart and in your soul, and you shall bind them for sign upon your hand, and they shall be for frontlets between your eyes, and you shall teach your children, talking of them when thou sittest in thy house, when thou walkest in thy way, when thou liest down, and thou risest up, and thou shalt write them upon the doorposts of thy house and upon thy gates, which again is quoting Exodus word for word. That's really all part of the first paragraph of the Shema. But there's an interesting thing at the end. They give another description of the boundaries of a land when he's wrapping this up. Like if you look at verse 24, every place whereon the sole of your foot shall tread shall be yours, from the wilderness and Lebanon, from the river, the river Euphrates, even unto the Hinder Sea, which is the Mediterranean, shall be your border. So, if you take this for the borders of Israel, it includes most of Lebanon, big chunk of Syria, most of Iraq.
Yeah.
Yeah. But again, every description that's given of the borders of Israel is slightly different. None of them are really the same. This is really the largest one. If this were the real borders of Israel, it would take up half the Middle East. It wouldn't be the tiny country that it actually is.
But also there weren't that many people in the tribes. I mean, as we talk about this time period.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
again, we don't know the real numbers. We talked about that census and numbers, and that was like 603,000 men between 20 and 50. And so if you count all the men under 20, the men over 50, all the females, and the fact that the tribe of Levi wasn't even counted in the census,
Mhm.
you're talking about a couple of million people at least.
Yeah.
Which again, most people feel is a ridiculous number. It's hard to take it,
Sure.
literally. So we don't really, but that's really true of almost all ancient writings. There's a tendency to really exaggerate numbers. So it's really, you have to take almost all ancient writing, even outside the Bible, with a grain of salt when they talk about numbers. We really don't know how many people there were that actually crossed the Jordan, and came into Canaan. Because these 603,000 people that was a military census. Men
Mhm.
between 20 and 50 who were able to fight in the army. And if
Yeah.
Moses had an army of 603,000 men, the Roman Empire at its height never had half that many men under arms. I mean, Moses could have conquered the whole world, never mind Canaan. So you have to wonder about the numbers.
Yeah, and you just think of the in the Exodus, the escape from Egypt, how in 40 years, how they multiplied. that's
Yeah,
that's a lot of procreation.
yeah. Although, the claim is that because of the hardships in Egypt, they thrived.
Yeah,
And that, because, you think, the Exodus starts off by telling you that 70 people came into Egypt with Jacob when he brought his family
right.
down to join Joseph. And so now we said and the slavery lasted for 400 years. So in 400 years, 70 people grew to 2 million.
Mhm.
It's a stretch. I mean, they had big
Yeah.
families in those days and polygamy and everything else, but still, it's kind of a stretch.
Yeah.
Okay. So, any questions, comments,
Yeah.
what we covered tonight?
Yeah. That was good, Fred. And
Okay.
we're
Thank
not going to
you.
meet next week, right?
No, next week. We'll
Okay.
meet again in 2 weeks.
Great.
Okay. See
Goodbye,
you guys
all.
Thanks,
then.
gang.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.